Let me get to Idayat Hassan. I mean, you started this narrative of there might be surprises from the young people, but how did you take into consideration the challenge of the expenses that they need to, or amount of funds they need to cough out if they need to pull the kind of surprise perhaps that you referred to?
I think it's very important that we do not also forget that politics is local. And the geopolitical dimension of politics, it's evident. Every region has got its electoral geography. And some of this geography are actually very favorable to young people. In fact, if you look at the history of young people in governance in Nigeria, you find largely most of them are from northern Nigeria. So it will not be something that you will not see some honorables, House of Assembly member coming from the northern part of the country largely. Now, that's just one point. Importantly is also that the way they vote will definitely differ in these elections. I still recognize that there will be challenges, particularly with the universities just resuming after the long hassle strike. That is, will take away a huge chunk of the vote. But most of these young people are going to vote according to what they feel is right. Basically, issues. The question will be how many of them will eventually vote, not the way they will vote. Because I believe they are very enlightened. They know what the issues are. It's not just the social media driving the issues. They are also driving the discussion themselves. And they have some candidate they may want to vote for varying reasons. We have talked about the example of Canada here. We have looked at Austria. So what stops those people from voting for the other candidates in places of like Kingsley Moghalu or Moyele Sowore, who have not sat back, but they have traversed the whole of the country, also canvassing for vote. Those kind of votes, if those kind of vote is going to take a huge chunk from that of the two dominant parties. Okay, 2019 is gone. What is very, very obvious now is the fact that most of the politicians will be retired in these elections, not forthcoming with the resources to actually prosecute these elections. Then even media is not actually fair to the women. How many women candidates have been brought forth, interviewed in these elections? At first, we even thought there were 5, but further analysis revealed that there are 6. Aside from Obi Ezekwesili, how many women, and maybe Eunice a bit, featured in the old discourse of the 2019 presidential elections? If you do not have platform, the family is not favorable to you, your community is actually not favorable to you, and the legal framework which can automatically give women the opportunity to actually be in office is not being passed, then there is actually nothing that will be done. In terms of youth, we were discussing about the possibility of a shock, that if there is a shock, that it is this kind of shock, in political shock in other countries, that brings the people like Trudeau or the Austrian president into power. While the possibility of that is there, and I continue to also insist that the possibility of younger people to emerge in some parts of the country are actually real. If you look at the ages of all the governors in northern Nigeria, you take Aminu Tambuwal, he was in the House for how many times before he became the Speaker of the House? He's now a governor, the governor of Borno, 2-time governor, ending. Several of them, Niger, Kogi, several examples to count. That is not possible for a woman. There is no woman governorship candidate on the platform of the two major parties.
Madam Hassan,
in this election.
let's find
they only fielded 2 deputy governorship candidates for APC, 3 in PDP.
Madam Hassan, and because like this is the eve of the elections, we'll like to refrain from talking about the candidates for the elections and their parties, or pardon?
Or naming names.
Or naming names, if we can. But perhaps also ask that question to Dr. Abdul. Your thoughts, I mean, the history of how women have been involved in our history of elections in Nigeria.
Yes, of course, Nigeria, we're not doing well in terms of women's participation in politics, and compare to even other countries in Africa, particularly when we go to the Eastern or Southern Africa, we are surely not doing quite well. The numbers are even dropping compared to what we had probably in 2003. We had a rise up to 8%, and now running around 5%, and that's not too good enough. And the prospect is not also looking that good, even for this particular election. The number may even drop unless if we push our leaders, elected officials, whether governors or president and others, to appoint more women into ministerial or commissioners position. The context is even worse in the northern part of the country. At the moment, in this particular dispensation, there is no single woman in any House of Assembly in the whole of the Northwest. In the whole of the 7 states in the Northwest, there is no single woman in the House of Assembly. And if you check the Northeast, there is probably about 3 across the entire Northeast in terms of women's representation. This is very poor, and I think it's one of the most embarrassing part of our democracy, and it's important to put that conversation on the table to see how well we can deal with it. There are a couple of issues, and I think it got that right in terms of some of those encumbrances, those things that discourages women. But I also think that sometimes the nature of our politics, and earlier people talked about these ethnic and religious issues, because you see, age category, whether we are talking about young people or gender, they have also certain other intersectionalities that shapes it. So when you say a young person, which young person are you referring to? The Muslim youth, the Christian youth, the Hausa youth, the Yoruba youth, the Igbo youth, the Tiv youth? Which one are we referring? Which one? Educated one, not educated one, rural, urban? So these are intersectionalities that comes with these categories, and therefore when it comes to elections, sometimes the age category doesn't drive our politics. It's probably the other intersections that drives them. The same thing applies to gender. As we try as much as possible, it's important to have more women into this, but the challenge is also that there are intersections, and sometimes those intersections gain more prominence than actually the gender identity that we're talking about. But I think that ultimately we may, the way conversations are going about young people, we actually need to also elevate the conversation on women representation and ensure that there is a stronger, better affirmative actions that supports women's participation in politics.
If I may put the question, Prof, culture, the issue of culture appears to be still drawing us back as women in this country.
Well, maybe what we need is a Me Too movement. Like
we had one on social media.
We really want one like that will galvanize the Nigerian society to acknowledge the position of womanhood. The women's movement, the feminist movement in the West has generated what you call feminist jurisprudence. Publications like When God Was a Woman or The Female Eunuch. And you see what has happened in America. We have something similar developing, especially as a result of the conviction of the professor from one of the universities. I read another story online about another professor in another university accused of trying to trade sex for marks. So that should really generate, and especially in Lagos State, the Ministry of Justice in Lagos State has divisions for women empowerment in terms of protecting the rights of women. What we don't have is a mass movement of women. You know, I know women go on demonstration against rape and a few other things, but I'm talking of a broad national front to protect the rights and interests of women, and in the process to think of nominating female candidates for elective office. Look at the recent example in the United States in Congress when Donald Trump went to address the joint session, and the women, they dressed in white. You know, we have a female speaker who is a powerful politician in America who they thought was going to be a non-starter. but he's giving, he's rubbed the nose of Donald Trump in the mud.
All right, but we need to go to break. But